Olympic Challenge has been brought to you with a grant from Motorola. 100,000 people working together to provide advanced electronics for business, industry, and government.
Good evening, I'm John Calloway. If it is important to your city, your world, or your life, it's on tomorrow at 6:30 on Chicago Tonight.
Programming on Channel 11 is underwritten in part by American Airlines and Amertech.
We'll get the gas.
Cool it, guys. I got it.
Come on, what's the Queen of Soul know about gasoline?
Baby, nothing. My car knows.
Why do more drivers rate Amoco Premium Lead Free the highest quality gasoline? Your car knows.
Back up, boys. Let the lady drive. Your car knows. Oh, yeah!
Tim, looks like the Bears did rather well.
The danger may be escalating. It's an atomic fire, and the Soviets can't contain it. Thousands may already have died or been seriously contaminated. Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. The Soviet reactor is still burning. The weather is shifting, and both those factors could be critical in determining the scope of this nuclear disaster. We'll go live to Warsaw for the latest on the impact behind the Iron Curtain, to Paris to talk with an expert on European reactor design, to Washington for a U.S. Senator's reaction after a top-level briefing today, and we'll talk with a Soviet expert about what the Russians may be hiding and why.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
When a similar accident happened in Great Britain, and you'll be hearing more about that in a few minutes, British authorities suppressed the details for more than 25 years. It is hardly surprising, then, that the Soviet Union, which has an infinitely more secretive tradition, is revealing only the sparsest information about its own nuclear disaster. But disaster is how even the Soviets are describing it. But where they concede 2 dead, diplomatic and other sources claim that more than 2,000 may already have died. Where the Soviets claim that the radiation situation is stable, U.S. intelligence sources insist that the graphite core of the reactor is still burning and spewing radiation into the atmosphere. The traveling White House press corps with President Reagan in Bali has just moments ago been briefed on what the U.S. government has been able to learn. Joining us now live by phone from Bali, ABC's senior White House correspondent Sam Donaldson. Sam, since I don't know what you have just been told, why don't you bring us up to date? Give us the headline.
Well, Ted, the Press Secretary Larry Speaks said a few minutes ago that based on the data that the United States is collecting, the fire in the 4th graphite reactor is in fact still burning. The fire has destroyed the reactor, which began with 200 tons of uranium interspersed with 1,700 tons of graphite. And Speaks says that as long as the fire burns, radiation will continue to be expelled from that fire. Speaks says no one in the world has experience in dealing with this kind of fire. Now, there is a cloud of radioactive material moving across the Soviet Union. Speaks says it is too early to determine whether it will reach the United States, but he says even if it does, it is highly unlikely, and I want to stress that's his language, highly unlikely that there would be a level of radiation that reached the United States that would be dangerous to public health. Now, as to the Americans that may be in the area of Kiev, Ted, Speaks says the U.S. has no accurate count, since Americans traveling in the Soviet Union don't have to inform the embassy of their whereabouts, but there is a group of American students in the Kiev area, we believe. We have no information on them, and the Soviets have not told us anything that would suggest that any Americans had been involved in a casualty list. As far as help for the Soviet Union, Assistant Secretary of State Ridgway expressed to the Soviet charge in Washington a few hours ago that the United States stood ready to help, and we very much regret what's happened. But so far, the Soviets have apparently not asked us for a great deal of help.
All right, Sam, let me just throw one quick question at you, and I don't know if you have the answer to this. As you heard in the introduction to this program, we are somewhere between 2 and 2,000 in terms of fatalities here. The Soviets are acknowledging that 2 people have died. Diplomatic sources are saying it could be as many as 2,000. Did Larry Speaks have anything to say on that subject?
He was certainly asked and said he had nothing to report on casualties. He had no casualty figures. As you know, Ted, they're very shy about revealing anything that would suggest that the United States, through our national technical means or any other method, has information that is not public. But Speaks did flatly deny that we knew about this accident before the Soviets made it public. There is a report, as you know, that we learned about it perhaps late Friday or early Saturday through our own spy satellite or some other intelligence means, but Speaks says that's not true.
All right, Sam Donaldson, thank you very much for that late update. We, of course, know little of what Soviet authorities are doing for their own people in the immediate vicinity of the accident, but in neighboring Poland, authorities have taken immediate and decisive action. Standing by live in Warsaw is ABC correspondent David Ensor. David, what's happening in Poland?
Ted, the government has banned the sale of milk, restricted it, and a special government commission has been set up which has arranged emergency measures, emergency plans that are being drawn up just in case, as well as measures to control contaminated food, which they think there may be. In about 2 hours' time, all the young school children of northeast Poland are going to be given a one-time dose of iodine as a preventative measure against the effects of radioactivity.
Now, this may sound like a strange.
Walpoles avoid milk.
David, this may sound like a strange question because obviously we are accustomed to hearing things in some kind of a context. But are the Polish people being told what has happened in the Soviet Union, and are they being given any information whatsoever of what the dangers to them may be?
They are being told that there has been a disaster, a nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union. And it is being stressed to them that although a radioactive cloud has passed over Poland, there is no real danger to human life. That's the phrase that the announcers and the government officials keep using. No real danger to human life. The danger to human health, however, may be considerable near the border. It's not clear. The Polish Institute of Physics is saying that radioactivity levels are 20 times the normal level in Białystok near the border. They are 6 times the normal level here in Warsaw.
All right. Are they being told what's happening in the Soviet Union, or is that wonderful custom behind the Iron Curtain of getting information by word of mouth? Is that providing any information?
The television and radio are saying that there's been this disaster at a Soviet nuclear plant. They only started saying that earlier today. Yesterday they were saying there might have been an accident in Sweden, but now they're saying it's a Soviet accident. As far as word of mouth around Poland, well, Poles are rather philosophical about problems that come their direction from the east. They're not surprised by them.
All right, David Ensor, many thanks. Later in this broadcast, we'll be talking with Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York, who insists that the Soviets have an obligation to share whatever they know about this accident. And we'll talk with Soviet expert Marshall Goldman about what the Russians aren't saying and why. But when we come back, why it's so dangerous. We'll be joined by a leading French expert on nuclear reactors, Shoja Etemad, and by ABC News medical editor, Dr. Timothy Johnson.
There are 100 nuclear reactors in the United States, supplying 16% of the nation's electricity. And 1/2 of the U.S. population lives within 100 miles of a nuclear power plant. Regionally, the New England states are the most dependent on nuclear power for their electricity, followed by the southeastern and middle Atlantic states. This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Kraft.
Most thrilling theatrical event. There's just never been anything like it. Cats. It sings, it soars, it dances and dazzles. The memory of Cats will live forever. The 7-time Tony Award winner, the once-in-a-lifetime experience, the best musical. In a word, Cats at the Schubert Theater. Call 1-800-233-3123 for tickets.
Nuclear disaster in the Soviet Union. Fire still burning out of control. The danger may actually be increasing.
Tomorrow, watch ABC's World News Tonight.
A Soviet diplomat in Finland today called it the worst nuclear accident in history. Have the potential dangers been overstated? Joining us live now in our Paris bureau is Shoja Etemad, a nuclear safety consultant and nuclear reactor designer. And in our Boston bureau, ABC News medical editor, Dr. Timothy Johnson. Mr. Etemad, in very simple language, so that I can understand it, if you would, please explain to me the significance of this graphite core that is supposedly burning in the middle of the reactor.
I don't quite understand what do you mean by the significance.
Well, I mean, why is... Well, yes, what is the danger of that?
Why is it burning? This is something which is quite unforgivable. Forgivable is the fact that we've had the same accident about 30 years ago, and we haven't learned any lessons from it, considering that everything was kept very secret. In fact, it's a habit within the nuclear industry to keep everything secret, since we consider that secrecy is part of the protection that we provide for the reactor.
All right, but let me interrupt you, because what I really need to know is why is that so dangerous to the population in the area? The fact that there is a fire that is still burning. Two questions. One, why is it so difficult to put that fire out? And two, what is the danger of that fire?
First of all, the fire that we had in about 30 years ago in England, we managed to put it out finally when nothing was working with a fireman's hose, which we just went in and poured water on it. In this case, we just can't do it because it's not a small research reactor, it's a huge monstrosity of graphite, which would be impossible to just get any close to. It's lethally radioactive, the environment. We have to manage to establish cooling channels within the reactor in order to cool it up, or just let it burn and to burn itself out.
Now, by burning, what is the danger of that? Is the fire itself carrying the radioactivity into the surrounding area?
Not only, you see, the graphite itself is used as a moderator. Moderator, that is to say, it controls the nuclear chain reaction. We slow down the neutrons so that we can have a better thermal efficiency. The moderator, the graphite, when it gets hot and it goes, or it's burning, it will become more and more effective and increasing the chain reaction. So as a result, we don't know. The fact that the graphite is going higher in temperature is making the uranium burn faster, more, or less.
So
we just don't know.
So in effect, then, we are getting more radiation the longer that fire continues. Is that an accurate statement?
It is quite a possibility. Unfortunately, nobody at this stage knows, but it is there's a strong possibility that the graphite is going to make, while burning, is going to make the uranium burn faster, and it's going to get hotter and hotter.
All right, let me switch now to Tim Johnson in Boston. Dr. Johnson, there are supposedly some 50,000 people in close proximity to this nuclear reactor. Radiation is being spread. Unfortunately, we cannot say at this point at what level. But what does radiation do to people who are within a mile or so of a nuclear reactor?
Well, distance counts for something, but the ultimate criteria of damage is the amount of radiation received by the body and how fast, how intensively that is received. Assuming worst-case scenarios that they are receiving rads in the range of 500 to 1,000, this is the kind of exposure that can result literally in death within hours from what is called the cerebral or brain syndrome. These people have brain damage, they become confused, they have convulsions, they wander around. These are the pictures we tend to remember from these kinds of exposures or that have been made dramatic on television presentations, and this can result in death within hours or days. At lesser levels, but of still intense exposure, people can have further damage to other parts of the body, including the intestines, the blood-forming system, and they will die within days or weeks. So depending on the amount of radiation received by a given person at whatever distance, they literally can die within hours or days or weeks.
Now, as the distance is further away from the reactor, as the level of radiation is lower, is it possible that death can then be put off by months or even years, that people get long-term damage, which we won't even begin to see for quite some time to come?
You've put it very precisely, and to me, in some ways, that's almost the more frightening aspect of this kind of accident. There can be damage that will not result in symptoms or in signs for months or years, or in the case of certain cancers, thyroid cancers, possibly leukemias, for decades. So people who have been exposed, even to low levels, are really not going to be scot-free for the rest of their life.
Now, Tim, last night we pointed out that this particular reactor is right next to what may well be a major water supply for the city of Kiev, a city of more than 2 million people. A, what is this going to do to the water supply? B, what does it do to the food chain? What does it do to grass, to cattle that may be eating the grass, and so on? And what is the long-term effect of that?
The potential of this radioactive cloud and continuing radiation to contaminate both water and food supply is enormous. Again, unfortunately, we won't have answers for years and decades in some cases to just how great that contamination was, how widespread in the water and food supply it might be, and what its effects are. But that's part of the frightening aspect. It will take decades to know the answers to the questions you ask in this moment of time.
All right, Tim Johnson and Shoshaya Temad, if you'd be good enough to stand by, please. When we come back, we'll have a report on the human costs of previous nuclear accidents throughout the world. You heard earlier on in this broadcast that secretiveness is a common characteristic to the nuclear industry on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Accidents at nuclear reactor plants have been with us, in fact, since the 1950s. And this is not the first one where the cost can be measured in human lives. Here's Nightline correspondent James Walker.
26 countries in the world use nuclear reactors to supply part of their electrical needs. In the last 29 years, there have been 15 major accidents. Ironically, the first nuclear accident was similar to the latest disaster in Chernobyl, October 7th, 1957, north of Liverpool, England, in a town called Windscale, the home of British nuclear fuels. Windscale's plutonium weapons reactor suddenly caught fire, releasing iodine and other radioactive elements into the atmosphere, contaminating a 200-square-mile area.
The trouble arose when radioactive dust from the overheated pile fell on the Cumberland pastures, and milk samples rushed to Harwell were found to contain 6 times as much radioactive iodine as international health standards permit. So for the time being, down the drain it goes.
At the time of the incident, officials claimed there would be no health problems. But in 1983, 25 years later, the British government said the radiation released was probably the cause of 39 cancer deaths, genetic damage, and 240 cases of thyroid cancer, among them Alex Bryson. Alex was 10 years old in 1957. On the day the power plant caught fire, she was 1 mile downwind at this school.
I went through quite a lot of trauma, and it took quite a long time to get back to normal again. And as I say, I've got this very big scar. I have to take tablets daily, which I couldn't live without.
2 months later, the Soviet Union suffered its first serious nuclear accident when the atomic waste depot exploded in the city of Kyshtym, 800 miles east of Moscow. Journalist Andrew Coburn has investigated the incident.
There was emergency evacuations, there were scenes of panic in the towns and villages in the path of the dust cloud. For years afterwards, the effects could still be discerned. For instance, women who got pregnant living in anywhere near, we usually were officially required to undergo abortions. All fresh food that was grown in the area had to be checked with a Geiger counter.
Soviet authorities tried to cover up the accident, but exiled scientist Zoriz Medvedev says the damage was so widespread that 33 villages had to be destroyed.
It was necessary to destroy villages in order to prevent people from returning back for their possession, for their things. So it was deliberate destruction by officials rather than by the explosion as such.
8 of the 15 major nuclear accidents have occurred in the United States. 1961, Idaho Falls, Idaho. An experimental reactor goes out of control, killing 3 technicians. 1966, Detroit, Michigan. The core of an experimental breeder reactor partially melts, but safety equipment averts a disaster. 1975, Decatur, Alabama. 1 worker with a candle sets off a $100 million reactor fire, lowering the cooling water to dangerous levels. But the accident that almost ended in disaster occurred in 1979 at 3 Mile Island outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
This is news from WKBO. Metropolitan Edison Company officials had to shut down their 3 Mile Island nuclear power station's unit number 2 this morning after an accident occurred within the plant's turbine system that resulted in the release of radioactivity into the atmosphere.
There was a partial meltdown. Some uranium melted. Today, 7 years later, no one knows exactly how much radiation was released over the countryside.
It was raining. The wind was blowing quite strongly. When I went out on the porch, the wind stopped, just stopped. And all of a sudden, there was a wave of heat just rolled over me. It was 3-4 weeks later that I noticed my hair coming out, and it was getting gray. It was white, I should say, white all through it.
We saw a 10% increase in sterility in our cows. We experienced stillbirths, abortions in the cows, in the goats, decrease in production for the ducks that we had here at the time. We had severe retardation in the cats, unable to walk, unable to develop, abortions in the cats.
But scientists believe that Saturday's disastrous meltdown at Chernobyl was more serious because, unlike 3 Mile Island, there was no containment building surrounding the reactor core.
At 3 Mile Island, there was a partial melting of the reactor core, but the reactor vessel remained intact, and the containment structure contained most of the radiation which was released. Whereas here in the Soviet Union, it seems almost certain that there's been a rather large melting of the reactor core.
It should be noted that there are 8 reactors operating in the United States that do not have containment structures. Officials, however, at the Department of Energy say that safety in these cases is not a problem because the reactors operate at lower pressures and at lower temperatures, making containment buildings unnecessary. But it's also worth noting that one of the problems that people around the world are learning about is that officials always maintain that everything is all right, that is, until something goes wrong. This is James Walker for Nightline.
When we come back, the impact of the Soviet nuclear disaster in Washington and in the Kremlin. We'll talk with Senator Alphonse D'Amato, who today urged President Reagan to seek international inspection of Soviet nuclear plants. And we'll be talking with Soviet affairs expert, Professor Marshall Goldman.
Fire still burns out of control, and danger may be increasing.
Tomorrow on ABC's World News This Morning.
Before Good Morning America.
What can be done about the illiteracy problem in America? We'll find out tomorrow. Also meet the Playmate of the Year, and Tom Cruise tells about his new movie tomorrow on Good Morning America.
Joining us live now in our Washington bureau is Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York, who was briefed today by the Reagan administration on the Soviet nuclear disaster, and Marshall Goldman, Associate Director of the Russian Research Center at Harvard University. Senator D'Amato, are the officials telling us more than they know?
Ted, I don't think they're giving us all the information. We've received some reports that the casualties might be up to 2,000 and certainly go beyond, as the good doctor had indicated. The radiation, the real damage is yet to be assessed. The fact of the matter is, though, that really the Soviets were terribly derelict. I think their conduct was reprehensible in not reporting to the world, as well as to their own people, the dimensions of this disaster. And I think they're going to continue to unfold in spite of their reluctance to come up with the facts.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second to warn our affiliates that we're going to be going a little bit over tonight. I hope you'll forgive us, but as you know, we had some late information from Bali where the White House was briefing reporters, and we had Sam Donaldson at the top of this broadcast, something which we did not have, so we're going to continue just a little bit beyond our normally allotted midnight hour. Senator D'Amato, I guess what I have to ask you is this. We have heard through the course of this program, for some reason, the nuclear industry globally seems to be a particularly secretive industry, and I can understand they don't want to unnecessarily alarm the citizenry of the Soviet Union, of Great Britain, of this country, so we're always getting reassuring words, not only from Russian officials, but from British officials and American officials. What you're asking, is it realistic?
Yes, I am asking something that's very realistic, and I think its time has come. I've written to the president, and tomorrow we'll be sponsoring a resolution along with Senator Nichols that calls for the International Atomic Energy Agency to monitor these plants throughout the world, including the Soviet Union and the United States. They now do it under the offices of the UN. Under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, they monitor 120 plus countries. As a matter of fact, they were in the process of getting agreements from the Soviet Union to monitor this installation. True, it was for a different matter, not for safety. But when we look at the fact that the Soviet Union will be building and operating up to 61 of these plants, and only 10 of them have containment buildings, and that we really are placing not only their citizens, but the citizens of the world at risk, the time for action really is now. And I think this demonstrates, you know, a nuclear accident is not one that stops at the boundaries. Nuclear proliferation doesn't stop at national boundaries. It's an international problem.
All right, Professor Goldman, you're a Sovietologist here tonight. Is there a snowball's chance in hell that the Soviet Union is going to allow an international monitoring team in to take a look at what's happened either at that plant or any of their other reactors?
Well, it's hard to know exactly, obviously, Ted, but I think that there is a good chance simply because world pressure in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the rest of the world, and including their own people, I think is going to mount. My own sense is that there must be enormous anxiety now inside the Soviet Union. The sparse words that are getting out officially from the Soviet government only serve to fan the concern and the fury, what they're doing to their own people. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens on Thursday, which is May Day, and a big celebration where the leaders have to expose themselves to the international press and other leaders. And I have a sense that this is going to come to a head. I don't think that they can go back and conduct business as usual. I just don't. This is too significant a phenomenon.
Now, Professor Goldman, what any good Sovietologist has to learn, and you're one of the best, is how to read between the lines of those official statements. What are you seeing between the lines of what they are saying publicly? And they've actually said a surprising amount.
They have said a surprising amount, and I think what's happening is they're beginning to realize that they've made a disastrous public relations mistake here, and that they need help. They have to recognize that, and indeed, if they don't get help, the situation is going to become worse.
All right, I want to go back to Paris for a moment, Mr. Etemad. You had some points you wanted to make. Please go ahead and make them.
First, and when I talk about being secretive, it's not only secretive, you know, we don't keep the secrets only amongst ourselves. We keep the secret, the technical shortcomings secret from the...
I'm afraid we've just lost audio to our Paris remote, so Monsieur Etemad, I hope you'll forgive us, and let me go back then to Senator D'Amato. The question becomes, how much are we capable of knowing independently? I mean, this is verification, national means of verification in a manner that I guess we had not expected to use. Some of us are under the impression that our satellites and our capacity of intercepting radio broadcasts and so on tells us almost everything we need to know. Do we, in fact, know everything we need to know?
Well, no, Ted, we really don't. The dimensions of actually the loss of life, for example, and the physical injuries sustained is still somewhat up in the air. We get that through other sources, not from spy satellites. Of course, we do know that there was a very real explosion, a tremendous one at that site. But we are still dependent upon intelligence information and information we get from allies, and that kind of information is just really beginning to sift through. And we really do know, although the CIA has not given us a confirmation of the magnitude as it relates to the number of casualties. And there we're getting conflicting reports, but obviously even the Soviet Union is beginning to up its estimates. They now say that somewhere under 100 people may have died. We get information that that figure may well go into 2,000 plus.
All right, Marshal Goldman, we've almost got to wrap up, but I'd like you to do one more piece of interpretation for us. When you hear the Poles taking the kinds of measures that they are taking, that almost has to be with Soviet concurrence, does it not? And what does that mean?
Well, not necessarily. I think that the East European countries are sincerely frightened by what's happening because they're downwind of what's going on. But it may very well be the Soviets have no choice in this matter. I think the Poles are doing it independently, but what I think is that the rumors that are beginning to develop and are going to cross the border through Voice of America, through BBC, are going to cause enormous concern in the Soviet Union. They read between the lines better than any of us can do, and they must know what's happening and must be very concerned.
All right, gentlemen, I thank all of you very much. Monsieur Etemad in Paris, Tim Johnson in Boston, and Senator D'Amato and Marshal Goldman, thank you all. There's a lot more to be said, but I'm afraid we just don't have the time to stay on any longer. Stay with ABC News for the latest on the Soviet nuclear accident and its after effects, on World News This Morning and Good Morning America. And of course, we'll have a full report on World News Tonight with Peter Jennings tomorrow evening. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
The 3 television networks will present nearly 10,000 hours of original programming this year. Not reruns, original programming. That's more hours than there are in an entire year. Now add programs produced by public television, local affiliates, and independents. Well, nobody could watch it all, and that's the point. There is a choice, and it's your choice. American television and you.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Journal Graphics, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023. Nightline is a presentation of ABC News.
Wednesday.
MacGyver, I'm truly happy to finally meet you.
MacGyver's up to his old tricks in an exciting new adventure behind the Iron Curtain.
Tomorrow.
The biggest revolution in travel since the invention of the wheel is American Airlines Ultimate Super Savers. Take off with incredible low fares to over 90 American Airlines cities in the continental U.S. Low fares from $39 to $159. Discover a world of affordable travel with American Airlines Ultimate Super Savers.
Something special in